Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here today with Abood Cohen. We are also welcomed by our very special guest all the way from Perth, Australia, Jason Damouni. Jason, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, mate. How you going?
We're going very well over here. Things are getting good. The summer's heating up. It's getting very hot.
Yep.
So yeah, how are things on your sides over there in Australia?
Very good. Well, different in terms of weather. It's getting a little bit cold, so starting to put the heater on now at night time. But summer's only around the corner. In Perth, like sometimes you get really sunny days during the winter, so it's like that. But things are going well. Things are going good. Thank you so much for having me on your channel.
Gotta say, Australia is definitely on my list of travels.
And when you guys come, I'll show you around when you get to Western Australia.
Sweet. Same to you. Whenever you come here, I'll show you around the Samaritan village. You'll love it here. A lot of history, culture, and a lot of good food.
I can't wait. As soon as COVID ends, I've set myself a goal of 10 kilograms. If I can go there and put on 10 kilograms, I'll be a happy person.
Wow. I set myself a goal of 10 pull-ups at the end of the year.
If I visit, I at least have to put on a minimum 5, like minimum 5 to 10. Like that's gonna be eating up.
Easy.
Yeah.
You got it.
No worries. So, Jason, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and how you're connected actually to the Holy Land, and maybe a little bit of your roots, and maybe let's start with that.
So, my background is Palestinian Christian. That's my heritage. My surname Damouni comes from a town called Al Damoun, which is 2 kilometers northwest of Nazareth. So it's always been, bucket list on my bucket list to go and actually visit that town one day, and hopefully after COVID that would be great. So I came to Australia. I was born in New York City. I came to Australia when I was 3 months old. My parents, both being the children of Palestinian Christians, were actually born in Lebanon. My grandparents on both sides moved from Haifa to Lebanon. My parents' side to a town called Damour. My dad's side to Beirut, and my parents were both born in Lebanon and grew up as Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. And then before the Civil War, my dad had left Lebanon to Abu Dhabi for business. And during the Civil War, my mom escaped a massacre. There was like a Damour massacre that occurred. She escaped that massacre and made it to Syria, where my grandma's sister paid for their tickets to come to Melbourne. My grandma's sister was married to an Italian, and they were living in Melbourne. And so they paid for their tickets to come to Australia as refugees, and then they eventually moved to Perth and settled there. My dad, during the war, applied for a green card to go to the United States, and got accepted and moved to New York and lived in New York. And then one day there was my mom's cousin had a wedding in Canada, and after my mom graduated university, my grandparents paid for her tickets to attend this wedding in Canada. My dad was also attending that wedding from New York, and I guess they danced, and then here I am out in New York. And then when I was 3 months old, they made the decision to come to Australia. And so growing up here, I sort of grew up removed from, the daily grievances of the conflict here. Growing up in a Western country, I didn't know much about the conflict growing up, except the rare occasions where my grandparents on my mom's side who are living here would talk about it. But what was funnily enough growing here is that not many Australians were aware of the fact that there is such a thing called a Palestinian Christian. I mean, like when I went to school, like when I went to school or when we would have parties, like I'd even have people come up to me like, "Oh, Jason, I didn't know you were allowed to drink." And I'm just like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, no, I thought, you weren't allowed to drink. Aren't you Muslim?" I'm just like, "No." I said, "I'm Christian." And then they would ask me like, "Oh, I didn't realize there were Christians over there. When did your family convert?" And I'm just like, "Convert? Like 2,000 years ago or something like that." So, like,
Yeah.
it's like, I guess until now things are changing, and like the internet has made, media more, like everyone that has an opinion can like go up and expose it and people can access it. Whereas I guess before, when it was like very limited to what was coming out on the major news, like all you would hear about Palestinians is either like, radical extremists, Muslims, all that sort of stuff. And I guess people here don't have an understanding of the conflict. They think it's more of a religious war of anything. And often you would hear the expression, "Oh, the Jews and the Muslims, they've been fighting for thousands of years." And you look at them and you're just like, what are you talking about? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
they have no they have no knowledge of Jewish history throughout Islamic civilization. And although it wasn't exactly the greatest, but Jewish people have always held like positions of government offices all the way up until the advisors of caliphs. And they had an intellectual class. There was the Jewish Academy of Baghdad, that was like the center of Jewish learning once upon a time. And and so like the Jews existed throughout the Islamic civilization throughout, relatively good peace, better than their existence in Europe. But there's this misconception that Jewish people and Muslims have been at it for thousands of years, when it's really only the last 100 years where extremism has seemed to appear on both sides, and it's because of the conflict. And although I can appreciate that we're not exactly going to come up with a solution here on this podcast, and I don't think a solution could come from the current climate of people's attitudes. So I think it's good to focus on now, well, let's create an environment where a solution can be born, and that's through changing people's attitudes, through constructive conversations. Like people seeing Israelis and Palestinians being capable of having conversations where they might necessarily like not agree on everything, but there is like a sense of there is an intention from both sides to want to understand the other's story and then create a new story together to change the direction of things. Because I mean, as it stands, the current status quo, even like prior to these escalations, the current status quo is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for Israelis, and it's certainly not sustainable for Palestinians. And Palestinians seem to be more so on the party which is experiencing more grievances, arguably in a number of different aspects. That's not to diminish the grievances that Israelis experience, but there is a need to change the situation. There's a more need of urgency from the Palestinian side, because obviously you can't have people living in the conditions of legal status and stuff that there is today. Like anyone that looks at this can, for the most part, acknowledge that something needs to change for the better.
Definitely.
I agree with you, Jason. There are some challenges, though, for that. You see, I was in London once, so we were in a workshop, kind of like this nonprofit organization that brings around people from around the world. Like at that time, it was from 8 different countries, including Israel, Palestine, and like Pakistan, Afghanistan, all those countries put together, 4 people from each country. And then at some point, at some night, we had this kind of debate going on. Sorry, not a debate, but a cultural night. And each group presented their culture. And then one group, I think it was the Palestinian group. Yeah, it was the Palestinian group that talked about Jaffa and Haifa as Palestinian cities. And the Israelis kind of that kind of like triggered the Israelis, you know what I mean? And eventually I thought, oh my God, it's just going to go fire from there. It's just going to go escalate. But what happened really after they had a genuine conversation with each other is that they turned out to be very good friends after that. It just completely changed. It's like the barriers actually kind of broke, even though the actual debate was going back and forth and you could see the fire between each other. But actually just that debate, like you said, this constructive conversation that they had just fixed everything for them. They turned out to be really good friends after that. So that is something that we're missing. But at the same time, one of the challenges that we're having is, we had a Palestinian friend who was supposed to join us in this podcast, a long time ago. But being in Nablus, it was a little bit challenging for him to appear and go on camera in public. And you know what I mean?
Because
I imagine it's easier for you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Look, I guess it also comes down to the person as well. How much, what do they care about? How much do they care about how they are perceived by their own community? And I think every community is going to experience something like that, some sort of pushback when they don't understand what you're trying to do. I mean, I'm sure your friend understands that he could possibly creating conversations, creating dialogue is a step in the right direction. But the challenge that he would face is how is that going to be received or perceived by his community? And unfortunately, it's a bit of mixture. It comes down to the individual sort of succumbing, what they believe is the right thing to do. And sometimes, and it could be the right decision to not appear because they know that the community in which that would have to perceive this don't have the appropriate environment to create some sort of critical thought capacity to understand, what they are doing. For example, he just might understand that his environment is not at a level of understanding or education or circumstances where the actions that he is doing will be perceived in a positive way, and therefore it would put pressure on him not to appear on the show or something like that. But it could be more constructive. Even if he doesn't appear on the show, he could still engage with that community and have these conversations.
True. Doesn't have to be public, right?
Yeah. Right now, it's just about whatever works. I mean, for me, being in Australia, there's not that much pressure. I'm not going to get a lot of pushback here. And I can look anybody in the eye and tell them I believe what I am doing is right. I don't think that what I'm doing by appearing on a show with Israelis is something which is going to be bad for peace or for future progress or development and everything like that. The thing, though, is that what I've found in doing peace activism is that it's easier to convince Israelis to forgive Palestinians than it is to convince Palestinians to forgive Israelis, simply because the Palestinians have always been on the losing side of the war. It's sort of harder for them to overcome the sort of intergenerational trauma that has sort of that existed from going from a 1.3 million population in 1 year to 156,000 in the next year. So it's like, no matter what the circumstances around that, anyone that goes through something like that is going to have deep-seated grievances that are going to be more challenging to overcome, as opposed to being on the side that won the war, that has a country, that has an education system, that has, like a welfare system, all that sort of stuff like that. So for the most part, through talking to a bunch of Israelis and Palestinians, I found that it's more or less easier to convince Israelis it's easier to help Israelis understand Palestinians than it is Palestinians understand Israelis. So
I see what you mean.
So
because of the pressure, the social pressure, and
exactly like this. I did an article with a friend of mine in New York who writes for the Times of Israel. So we did one about Ashkenazi and Palestinians, Ashkenazi Jews and Palestinians being co-indigenous to the same land, right? Where in which I wrote about excuse me, I wrote about Palestinian history and identity, and he wrote about Ashkenazi history and identity. And we said it's not this delegitimization culture gets us nowhere, but it's also like a common trap that everyone gets into when they see a radical from the other side saying some radical stuff. You know what I mean? Like people, it's easy. Like people just get polarized in the other direction, and it does nothing to serve the purpose. So we try to create something that takes the topic of indigenous, in being indigenous to the land, and placing it in the conversation that brings us closer together as Semitic cousins, not in the conversation about who has more historical claim. You know what I mean? Because I mean, we can't this is not about historical claims as much as people on both sides try to make it out to be. They try to out-indigenous each other. If that
it's a waste of time, isn't it? It's Jason. It seems to me like I hear these arguments: who's more indigenous, who's been in the land more. I've even heard like who's ruled in the land more, who's had more time as a united kingdom, who's this, who's that. I think it's all a waste of time and a distraction method. It doesn't do anything productive on the land. It doesn't. You're not doing anything by arguing this or that way. For me, it's very, very frustrating to hear.
I mean, what's going to happen if we're going to prove 100% that these people are indigenous? What's going to happen?
Exactly. If people are still there, I mean, like it will. This is the thing. It's very like it's funny when someone comes to me trying to do like historical claim, because like as a Palestinian Christian, like we descend from ethnic Jews that followed Jesus as the Messiah. Like Jesus was a part of the community in Second Temple Judaism.
Is that called Messianic Jews, I think? Or?
No, that's something different. That's a bit different.
Sorry,
but like the original followers of Jesus were Jewish. You know what I mean? And they apostated from Judaism to follow Jesus as the Messiah, and were, you know what I mean, apostated by the current Jewish establishment. So those people were never participating in the Bar Kokhba revolts. There's a famous quote in the Bible, Matthew 22, that says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God's what is God's." Meaning the Christians paid their taxes. They were pacifists to the Roman occupation that was there. I mean, they had. It was either that or die, you know what I mean, first and foremost. But they believed in just paying Caesar what is Caesar's as Jesus has commanded. And also, like, because of that, when the Romans came back, they could differentiate between ethnic like Jews that were religious and ethnic Jews that were Christian, you know what I mean, or followed Jesus. And so when they banished, when Hadrian banished the Jews, he only banished the Jewish Jews, not the Christian Jews. So I often tell Jewish people, and I meet them all the time, like, my ancestry is exactly the same as your ancestors, like pre-Jesus. You know, we literally come from the same people. That's why I have curly brown hair. Like I can pass for Israeli quite easily. You know what I mean?
Very easily, very easily. Yeah, I agree. And something that when I look back at some of the history that you were talking about and the shared roots and shared genealogy, it's something that people don't really focus on or realize. And something that I can see happening here maybe, and I'd love your opinion on this, Jason, is, you know, one of the things that we're talking about is connecting between the different people living here on the land. And we have Abraham as a father figure for Judaism. He's beloved. In Christianity, in Samaritanism, Abraham's very important as well, right? And obviously in Islam, Ibrahim, El Halil, and who's buried over there in Hebron. So do you think that we can kind of even have this kind of unifying figure here for all the people on the Holy Land in Abraham? And can he be a figure that people look to as a unifier and somebody that can maybe, you know,
like a good Samaritan or something?
Yeah, like a good Samaritan.
You know that term, Jason?
Yeah, of course. That is the Samaritans I mentioned numerous times in the Bible as well. So, like, it's like it should be placed in the conversation that brings us closer together as Semitic cousins. Like,
Sure.
these are the type of conversations that we sort of need to have to start changing the attitudes. Like, yes, everyone's got a narrative, right? But like, it's not about. It's just as much about understanding other people's narrative as it is explaining your own, you know. And if you don't have that balance and you're all about just like blurting out your narrative and not wanting to hear any oh, that's a good comment. Yeah, see, exactly. Yeah, when you're part of the problem if you're somebody that promotes picking sides and not picking peace. Like trying to place like indigeneity into the conversation about the conflict and not in the conversation about we're cousins. We should be learning, we're trying our hardest to change attitudes so that we can put together a good model that we can coexist and both have our self-determination. Like there's just so many things that need to change about the current environment in regards to attitude, which I feel is one of the major steps in creating something that will allow for a solution to come forth from. Because if the further delegitimization culture continues, the more the environment for a solution becomes infertile. So it's about spreading love, spread the fertility. You know what I mean?
You see, Jason, I completely agree with you, and it's really sad that a lot of people, when we talk about, you know, peace and love and all these things, they go and they think, oh, it's a hippie thing, and they don't really think how powerful it is and how powerful it is to change a person's mindset and ideology. Unfortunately, you know what I mean? And it is. We are missing something here in our culture.
Well, exactly. Look, it's easier to call it a hippie thing than to try and actually do something to change something. So people calling it something like that, you know, like they can just look in the mirror and do something productive instead of spending their time. You know what I mean? Like criticizing people that are trying to make the situation better. It's like, okay, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's also, it becomes a hippie thing if there's no substance behind what we're saying. You know what I mean? So like, I think that we should, like, yes, having these conversations is good and it is something that we're doing. But there are other things, like, what good is that if we're not putting any like pragmatic sort of action behind the things that we're saying in terms of like taking steps to change things. Such a thing could be just like reviewing like policies that seem to discriminate against Palestinians and go approach, you know what I mean, putting together a letter or a community to approach the right minister to lobby certain things, you know what I mean, together as Israelis and Palestinians. I like, this is a constructive approach.
Well, so we have a very powerful tool to do that, which is YouTube. And like, just wanted to remind you guys, yesterday we had a pilgrimage, you know, the Samaritans. We do 3 times pilgrimage each year. And this crossed my mind. Basically, I had to tell my grandfather. He told me he basically comes a little bit after 2 hours after the pilgrimage comes, because he's a little bit older. So he comes where the part where he gives the blessings. So there's no phone yesterday. You cannot call him. And I was on the peak. And I have to go and walk it all down, which is like maybe 15 minutes. So I thought about it. Whoa! So what if we like had a podcast, but like right in real life, and you had to gather people every time and go and send letters, and you know, and that's. So today we're taking it for granted how easy it is to spread the word. You know what I mean?
It's true. It's true. We do have the power of technology. No, we do. We do have the power of technology. Is definitely behind us. I wanted to touch on a point, Jason. Like, so you're for like pragmatic, direct action, right? So something crossed my mind, like things that we could technically lobby for here as Israelis and Palestinians on the ground for change. Maybe are there things like, say, checkpoints is something that Palestinians severely dislike, and obviously for many good reasons. and maybe say something like that the PA do, which Israel doesn't like, is something like the pay for slay kind of policy, which is taken upon by some of the authorities over there, where they pay family members of people that have committed a terrorist act. If you could lobby each side to take that like one thing away, do you think that like steps like that along the way to a framework to peace could help, or do you think it all needs to be done in one like peace deal and get it over and done with, and try and move forward in whatever type of solution that may be, one state, two states, whatever?
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, look, so yeah, I think that I think that we need to take. I do think we need to take pragmatic steps in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Something that would reduce the need. Okay, so a lot of people that bring up the pay for slay point, it's very hard to address this, because on one hand you have Palestinians that resist in whatever way, like even if it's going to protests, often get arrested, right? Like, Israelis arrest Palestinians for all sorts of things, you know what I mean? Not just extreme acts of violence and terrorism, right? Mm-hmm. And the pay for slay facility that the Palestinian, it's like a stipend that the Palestinians give. It applies to anyone that has had that has no other means of income. And we can go down to another rabbit hole, being like, well, if Israel didn't practice collective punishment, then there would be less of a need for people to pay for slay. I'm not interested in going down that rabbit hole, but what I'm interested in saying is that you eliminate the need for pay for slay if you can create job opportunities that give Palestinians a different avenue. You know what I mean? I would assume that there are some portion, especially as unemployment goes up within Palestinian societies, that it would going and getting yourself arrested could become someone could even consider that as a means of a career or an income or something like that. And you eliminate that by creating and other opportunities, you know what I mean? Job opportunities or something like that, if that's what you're concerned about. But I can tell you right now, the main motivator behind Palestinian resistance is not that it could lead to financial support from the Palestinian welfare program or whatever you want to call it, right? The main motivator is the current status quo, is the daily, you know what I mean, what the perceived injustices of the Palestinian psyche. This is what is the main motivator for people to go out there. And I'm sure a portion of that is influenced by pay for slay, and we can eliminate that by creating job opportunities or other avenues where people, you know what I mean? This is, if you fix the situation, you eliminate the problem. And we fix the situation. It's very hard to say what moves are we going to do next. I think the most actionable thing that we can do now is work towards changing people's attitudes from wanting one side to win and the other side to lose, for people just that both sides to want win-win. You know what I mean? That's the most actionable thing that we can do. I mean, it's how much power do we really have? You know what I mean? You mentioned, social media is probably one of the main tools that we can use to changing people's attitudes, and I'm glad that we're doing it through this, you know what I mean, through these platforms. So it's just
but more practical steps even would be creating job opportunities. Definitely. But don't forget, there's
correct
a good amount of Palestinians, close to 1 million, I think, if I'm not correct, that work in Israeli cities. So these are this is a start, I guess. But you kind of reminded me of something. So we have in the Samaritan village here, we have a gate that closes at around 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Okay, and I believe that some Palestinians, either they don't exactly know who we are, they think it's a settlement or something close to us. You know what I mean? And some particular people, they were caught on camera throwing some kind of Molotovs on the gate. And they have been doing this on and off for about 1.5 years now, every 2 months. It hasn't been really dangerous, But there's kind of like a clear picture. You can see that they're either trying to send a message, or some people had a theory that they're trying to get like a salary, because if they're getting jail or something, some people propose that they might be doing that so they can apparently be seen on camera doing that and then get punished for that. Well, get punished, but also get a salary, you see? So that's something that definitely, if they had a job opportunity, they wouldn't do.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah. I see your point there, Jason.
100%. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that, like, I think there needs to be more outlets, like a lot of Palestinian activism, as I'm sure you would know, is like sort of focused on like BDS. You know what I mean, like boycotting, divest, sanctions, and stuff like that. Like, you have to understand that BDS is perceived as the only non-violent means of resistance that gives Palestinians the feeling like they're actually doing something, if that makes sense, right? And that's what, and it sort of is, for the most part. No one's ever created, you know what I mean, like something else which is nothing to do with Israel, but more so to do about building Palestinian welfare and everything like that.
This is the issue, though. This is the issue, though, Jason. This is the issue with BDS, right? We were talking about job creation and how important that is. I've seen a BDS campaign take jobs away from Palestinians. So, for example, there was the SodaStream factory that used to be in the West Bank, and BDS, you know, set out on a campaign spending millions of dollars to get this factory out of the West Bank, and campaigned against SodaStream. So in the end, SodaStream, the company, gave in and moved the factory to Israel proper, and the jobs just went to Bedouins in the south, because now it's right next to Rahat. So it kind of had an opposite of an effect of having something good for the Palestinians, having a factory there that was employing thousands of people, to then having it move to another place. So, like, as an Israeli, we kind of see BDS. We obviously think it's a way better way of going than terrorism, right? Like, it's non-violent. But the problem is that Jewish people relate it back to, let's say, the early boycotts that happened during Nazi times and stuff like that, you know, where Jewish shops were boycotted and goods were boycotted. And, you know, so it's very hard for Jews to kind of be like, oh, well, it's just a harmless organization that's, you know, out there for looking out for the Palestinian people. They kind of see it as something that could be a threat, if you see what I mean, like something that to be wary of, if you like.
But what's the end goal in the end? Because you know, if it keeps going and it affects the Israeli economy in a very negative way, aren't we going to have like some lack of resources or something? I mean,
essentially, that's the goal. I guess BDS like feels like by putting pressure on Israel through these boycotts and sanctions or whatever, that it would force policy change in Israel, right? That's the whole purpose. Like exactly what happened in South Africa. The thing is, it's not the same as what happened in South Africa, because in South Africa you didn't have like a world superpower supporting South Africa. You know what I mean? And there's a lot more to it, like within this conflict, that has been diluted to try and relate it to South Africa. But it's easy for someone to perceive it as, you know what I mean, like the situation being similar to South Africa. If you're new to the, you know what I mean, like if you don't have a dog in the game, or so to say, and you're just an observer, and this is what from optics it looks something like similar, like with the SodaStream. Like, I guess the BDS movement perceived that ultimately the profits were going to the owners of SodaStream, and they were willing to sacrifice the jobs of the Palestinians in order to get it moved. And like, although they would argue that although a lot of Palestinians lost jobs and everything like that, in terms of the greater good of the Palestinians, it was the right thing to do. Now, like, this is the thing. Do I agree that it was the right thing to do? I don't blame them for thinking that. I don't blame them for having that mindset. You know what I mean? Because it's like you said, it's much more preferable than like taking arms or militant action or terrorism or anything like that. It's like the non-violent alternative. And this is what I mean about attitudes. The current climate of attitudes are still about attacking one another, win, lose. This is the current climate, and it's not just on the Palestinian side. It's for them it's on both sides, and we somehow organically have managed to create a little bubble of Palestinians and Israelis that can transcend beyond the conventional dialogue that has been plaguing this conflict from its very start, and take a mature step to be like, okay, guys. Like, obviously, we're all good people. No one is born, you know what I mean, like, hateful. This is something which is taught or influenced by our environment, and you know what I mean, for the most part, by, you know what I mean, by parents. And that's
school and education, probably.
Well, exactly. And now, and we are creating and perpetuating a situation where people that are, you know what I mean, stateless, are now becoming homeless. You know what I mean? Especially in Gaza. And the longer that this continues, the worse it's going to get, and the harder it's going to be to change attitudes. That's why we have to be like, nah, 2021, guys, time to move, like, time to break past the conventional talking points and go into something which is going to actually bring about something sustainable for both sides. And I guess it comes down to first principles. Like, for example, right? What I mean by first principles, you wouldn't argue, like, if I wanted to promote Christianity, I would approach it completely differently to a Muslim than I would to an atheist. Because, like if I wanted to promote Christianity and Jesus and whatever, I would go about it very differently if I'm approaching an atheist as opposed to approaching a Muslim. Because when I'm approaching a Muslim, there are first principles that we agree on, which is one, the existence of God, right? Two,
the prophets, and
that Jesus existed and he came from a divine birth. You know what I mean? So whereas with an atheist, I don't have those first principles. So bringing this back to the conflict, we need to establish a set of first principles when it comes to conflict resolution. And one of those first principles is that both identities, Palestinian and Israeli, are just as legitimate as each other. Like, that's the main, like, first principle. And the second first principle is that both of us have the right to be on the land of our ancestors, and both of us have a legitimate, you know what I mean, connection to the land, which is like more so in the first principle. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, people are just approaching this from a delegitimization culture instead of approaching this from, like, let's create a set of first principles and see what we can build on from there. You know what I mean? Which is why I love what you guys are doing, and because you're providing the platform to allow the change of attitude and the dialogue to happen.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. And it sounds similar to what you're talking about. It sounds similar to the constitution that Rafi and Zahir built, Abood, you know, for the federation model. They basically, an Israeli and a Palestinian guy came together and they built a federation model.
Yes,
and
I'm part of that group as well. I know.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
And look, this is something. This is like a practical thing that we can take to politicians and be like, hey, look at the model that we've created. This happened organically between Palestinians and Israelis. Take a look at it. And I mean, it might not be the thing that sells, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Like,
it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Definitely builds a bridge, not a bridge, but like like steps, basically, for sure.
Exactly.
Maybe we can hold the tip of the rope with that, you know, because we do want, at least we kind of know to some degree that part of solving this whole conflict might be at least beginning by giving both sides the same rights, and at least also removing obstacles, for any side, whether that is economical obstacles or some kind of checkpoints or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to take a lot of community engagement from both sides. But I believe that if we keep doing what we're doing and it catches on, people's attitudes will change, and they will pressure leaders to do things that are constructive. And I guess like in the diaspora, like especially in Australia, I mean, like Australia has always been supportive of Israel, but it's always supported a two-state solution and everything like that. It's about Australians lobbying like the government here to pick the side of peace. Don't be pro-Israel. Don't be pro-Palestine. Be pro-conflict resolution. It's about the Jewish and Palestinian communities in the diaspora building bridges and lobbying their leaders to promote peace. But unfortunately, what's happening in the diaspora is that it seems to be like we are the ones that are perpetuating the social media PR war conflict, you know what I mean, the most. And I think sometimes it is because of this disengagement. I mean, like I would ask people like who, like the people in the land, like people like you guys that are in like in the land itself, want a solution, you know what I mean, like want to coexist. And I think people on the outside don't realize that, you know what I mean, it's not as polarized in the land than it is outside of the land, especially in like the United States and Canada. It is so polarized over there. And like, I mean, even in the eastern states over here in Australia, Perth is like on the west coast, relatively small population. Like the Jewish community is very small. The Palestinian community is very small. You don't see rallies and counter rallies, like fighting with each other. Like the only thing you get is like the odd thing happening in the Curtin University student body, you know what I mean, guild or something like that. And even then, like Perth is like an environment where everybody knows everybody knows everyone, and we're for the most part pretty laid back. So having Jewish friends growing up has never been an issue for me as a Palestinian living in Perth. And we have conversations like the ones that we're having today. Like I said, we don't always agree on everything, but we keep it respectful, and we understand so much more about each other than people living in the United States or people living in Canada, where the communities are so much more polarized. So if people can see that, hey, look, there are Palestinians and Israelis coming together and having these conversations, then like that will trigger other thoughts in them, and that they will react very, very differently, as opposed to clicking on a video where one side is just shitting on the other side, excuse my language. But
this is the problem. This is the problem we're having, Jason. And I think one of the things that you touched on, which is key to solving this, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is getting people to be pro-conflict resolution. Don't be pro-Israeli. I don't need your help. I don't need you waving a flag around and being, oh, I love Israel. Or I don't need it. It's not going to do me any good. And same on the other side. I don't think that waving a Palestinian flag around and saying I'm pro-Palestine is going to get anyone anywhere. I think if people want to help, Canadians, Americans, Australians, Africans, whoever wants to help, be pro both sides. Be pro both people. Simple as that. And be pro getting this conflict resolved. And one of the things that, you know, it's a recurring theme on here, Jason, but there's many nations that have been at war for longer than 100 years, and they managed to solve it. They managed to get to a long-term peace, and nowadays they're living fruitfully in very great.
They almost forgot they had conflicts.
Yeah, they've almost forgot they had conflict. Exactly, and we're not even at that stage of getting close there yet, and that's where I want to push us. I want to push us on that route, because that's what we need. And like you said, the people on the ground here, that's who it affects. It affects us Israelis and Palestinians living in the West Bank and in Gaza. That's who it affects. The guy in Canada who has his opinions, or who is pro really Palestine or pro really Israel, and how can you be pro the other side? you're not helping, mate. You're not helping.
No.
Be pro both sides. Come and do things.
You know, Jason.
You know?
Continuing on your Amir, I don't know if you finished, but like continuing on what you said, Amir. Jason, I don't know if you know, Samaritans do have like both nationalities, you know, Palestinian and Israeli.
Yes,
most of us. So we always try to kind of show people really like, oh, like we're doing a pretty good job at living with both people. So maybe we can teach both sides how to do it. In some ways we're kind of being a bridge of peace. We even have this this new business that is kind of letting Palestinians order mail much easier, because their mail delivery, it's like they want to order something, it has to go through Israeli borders, and it takes much longer because it's from a Palestinian source. Now we have a Samaritan kind of like made company that brings their mail much faster, like 2 weeks, and boom, it's here. So we're kind of like a link now, because we have both nationalities. And what this really allows us to do is really kind of connect both people in a very smooth way. Also, my name is always one of the examples I set. You know, people see Aboud Cohen or Abdallah Cohen. Literally every time I go to the checkpoint and I look at the soldier's face, whenever he sees Abdallah Cohen, he gets confused because he sees Cohen. He's like, okay, like his family is Cohen, but he sees Abdallah and he says, but is he a Muslim that converted to become Jewish, or is it the opposite, you know, or something like that? But what I'm trying to say is that, you know, when we talk about a federation plan or something like that, it does remind me of like having the population of what would be the federation plan to be like having the same rights as what we have right now, which is access to all the cities and locations and all around the Holy Land, and all the rights, the same rights, both, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
There might be consequences that we might not know of, but you know, like everything, there's consequences. We just need to know what's the least. You know, it's a plan in a way. So
well, this is the thing. I would love to see like whether it's part of a federation model, or it becomes its own state. Like I would love to be able to apply for a Palestinian passport and be able to go back, you know what I mean, and live amongst, you know what I mean, like live amongst the places where my ancestors were. Like it's not that much of an ask for me. You know what I mean? Like given what's been going on, given that there's literally a town with my name in it. But at the same time, I don't want it to be at the expense of our Jewish cousins. Like, I don't think anybody should just be like uprooted and moved. I think that happened in that past. Someone has to call it an end. But in one way or another, like it would be great, because the Samaritan, like when we talk about Palestinian, like what it means to be a Palestinian, what was Palestine. For me, it's always been a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society where, you know, once upon a time, a group of various different backgrounds all coexisted and built, you know what I mean, like the land, like the castles, the fortresses, the minarets, you know what I mean, that existed all throughout the land, from the Samaritans to the Sephardic Jews to the Christians of all denominations and the Muslims of different denominations and the Druze. You know what I mean? Like it was far ahead of its time in terms of, you know what I mean, the surrounding global, you know, civilization.
That's what made it the Holy Land. I mean,
exactly. And now it's just turned into something where it's just turned into the conflict.
Us against them, and
us against them and everything like that. I mean, like, look. You can't blame the early Zionists for wanting to have a country. You know what I mean? Like if anyone that understands Jewish history, whether you're Palestinian or not, can sympathize, you know what I mean, with why Zionists wanted to have Israel, right? In its early days. But most Palestinians don't know the nuances of this part of the history, right? a lot of them don't even know that when Zionism started, it was actually opposed. You know what I mean? I mean, the older generations would have known, but the younger generations don't know the nuances. They don't know that most Jewish people were against Zionism when it first started, because there was the Orthodox belief that they had to wait for the Messiah in order to be able to return to the land in the first place. And it wasn't until European anti-Semitism heightened and the era of Rav Kook's that consolidated Orthodox and secular mindset that the majority of Jewish people became Zionists. And yet you still have people that will point to groups like the Naturi Karta and be like, oh, no, you see, these people are the real Jews. I'm like, bro, they're like 5,000 people out of 15 million. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like once upon a time, that was probably the majority of the thought, but not. It's definitely not after, the of
no, that's like, that's in demographic. That's like looking at people like Hassan Nasrallah, Yahya Sinwar, and Baghdadi, and saying, look, guys, all Muslims are like these guys because of, the Naturi Karta thing is really, it's such a far stretch. And exactly. I just think that it's not, it doesn't need to be a focus, what one extremist group thinks, or a part of our issue here that we're having in the Holy Land is these extremist groups on both sides that we have that are very small percentage of people, but who make a ton of noise and who cause a ton of problems. And then,
who's the media focuses on, if you think about it.
Yeah, and then they're the ones that the media focus on. We also have a question here, Jason. I think it's quite interesting for the conversation, and I'd love to hear your views on it. Someone has put, don't you think that politicians have more self-interest in keeping the conflict the way it is at the moment?
I guess I maybe like some politicians, that exists in every war. I guess like you usually just follow the money,
money and power.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I would say for the most part, like it's more in their self-interest to achieve peace, because that's where the real money is. If you want to look at it from that perspective, I mean, God, if you had stability on that land, if everyone was like, if you took a census and everybody was happy on that land, living, you know what I mean, with relatively good economy, stability, the Middle East would be the most prosperous region in the world. And if we're going to look at our place in the global future, I mean, like, peace in the Middle East is only going to protect us from a powerful China and Russia in the long run. In the long run.
100%,
so it's like, it's now becoming out of necessity. It's short. Like if this doesn't happen soon, it's going to become really quickly that we need to have stability there in order to survive the long term with the rise of other superpowers. So like I said, it's about changing people's attitudes. It's about sharing the narratives. I mean, most Palestinians learn about Zionist narratives from other Palestinians or pro-Palestinian media, and most Zionists learn about Palestinians from other Zionists or pro-Zionist media. It's just like, if you want to learn about someone, like, go and sit with them. You know what I mean? Like, learn the culture, learn their story, all that sort of stuff. And this provides a perfect platform for us to do so. So
thank you.
Guaranteed it will change anyone's thoughts if you just sit with them and learn about their culture. And that's why we like me and Damir, we really love tourism, and we want to use it, to really connect Palestinians and Israelis, with like sharing the culture of both people, and not only the culture but also the amazing archaeological places and food also.
Everything, Aboud. The food, the tourism, the weather, the archaeological sites. We're blessed. This is a tiny, tiny land. I just want people to realize, the land from north to south is like 7-8 hours drive. Like, I know in Australia that sounds laughable, right, Jason? You guys drive for 2 days and you still haven't.
Yeah, it's a continent, so
so the land is so small but yet so bountiful, with amazing cities, amazing towns, amazing people, amazing food, amazing archaeological sites. And I think tourism is key, like you said, for a peaceful Middle East, not just Israel, Palestine, but a wider Middle East. Because if
absolutely. Could you imagine the tourism industry, should peace happen tomorrow, what would happen like after COVID, obviously, but imagine tourism. You know what I mean?
Well, before COVID, we were already breaking records in Hard Razim here, in the Mount Gerizim here. We were already breaking records of like 20,000 tourists, like including the tourists outside, and even increasing.
Think of it,
huge
like there's already a huge tourism industry there, even under the certain circumstances that it's placed under. You know what I mean? The conflict. If this conflict has resolved, the boost in those figures would just be astronomical, and not just across the tourism sector, but it could go from like natural resources to energy to innovation, and
we're talking about both sides, right? So
exactly, and it would allow, it would open up the economic wall between Israel, Palestine, and the greater Middle East, and not just UAE.
We would solve the problem of fighting over resources. Like I'm sure that's one of at least the conflict's problems.
Look, like I said, the first step is to change, is to focus on changing attitudes. And then the second step is there's two things. Identify the key policies that we want changed, that we feel that are discriminatory against Palestinians, and figuring out what it is exactly Palestinians for the most part want, and how can we make that sustainable, you know what I mean, to coexist alongside Israel, not at the expense of Israel. And for Israel to coexist alongside Palestine and not at the expense of Palestine. Because so far, like, it's the Israelis that are living at the expense of the Palestinians, not the other way around. And that sort of ties into why I feel like it's easier for Israelis to forgive grievances that they have had towards Palestinians, is because of that dynamic that certainly exists. We need to build a Palestine that is not going to be at the expense of Israel, and then whether we become a united federation, that would be pretty cool, in my opinion. But it involves the approval of the greater, you know what I mean, like the greater community, and hopefully through changing attitudes, we can see that change. I mean, look, attitudes like that and visions of something similar to that came from Herzl, even like with Alt Neuland. Like if Alt Neuland was a book about creating some sort of a binational state or something. So I mean, it's not too far off as to what Zionism could have been. You know what I mean? Like, had there not been a 92% Arab population that was just going to reject, you know what I mean, like Zionist rule over them. But you can't blame from Zionists from wanting to create our own country, and you can't blame Palestinians for being like, oh, we don't want to be ruled by 8% minority. You know what I mean? That because there were 92% at the time of the Balfour Declaration, and so, because like no matter where you drew a line on the sand, like in the sand, or drew a line on a map, you would always have like a majority Arab population, or like a 40% Arab population that would not vote in a Jewish plebiscite. You know what I mean? Like a Jewish thing. That's why it was just like seen as, oh, this is just impossible. And, you know, both sides rejected it. War happened. We can't change the past. What's happened has happened. You know what I mean? Like, we can't deny the rights of Jewish people to want their own self-determination and a country to call it their home, just as we believe that they can't do the same to us. But the reality is that Jewish people have a country, Palestinians not quite. We need to build the level of, you know what I mean? Like, we need to make things a little bit more equal, but not at the expense of Israel. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%. You know, I wish so many people realize. For example, I'm just gonna add one more story here, Amir. It's a really interesting one. I have a friend who kind of visits me from time to time, and he really loves. So Shechem. A lot of people don't realize why Shechem is named like that. Shechem means shoulders, basically. We have Har Gerizim and we have our Ebal, right? Like both mountains. And my friend really loved the Ebal mountain also, and he kind of went there with his family once. And when he was going down, he crossed through a Samaritan village, a Palestinian village, which is kind of close to Nablus, and there was a like really tight U-turn, and his car kind of flipped. So those Palestinians, like right near the village, all gathered. Like I think he said, like around 70 people or something, all gathered and stayed with him and helped him. And he felt so much, so much gratitude towards those Palestinians that even after 8 months, he came with me just to go and to that Palestinian village and send a letter. He wrote a letter of thanks, and that's through Nablus, and he went to Nablus. And by the way, he was kind of wearing some religious clothing. And he even didn't mind removing the kippah. He went through Nablus with the kippah. I even went to him. I told him, "You sure about it?" He said, he didn't mind it. So, that's the thing.
Like Palestinians, for the most part, aren't anti-Semitic. Like
true. I hope people realize that.
A lot of the people that are like some of the most pro-Palestinian voices are Jewish. You know what I mean? So Palestinians never really had a problem with Judaism, the religion. They just had a problem with Zionism as an ideology that they sought to demographically change, change the demographic composition of the land so that Arabs would be the minority in order for Jews to have a demographic majority to create a country.
It's so true, because like just about 2 hours ago, I was at a mechanic in Nablus, and he kind of told me the same. He told me we don't have any problems with the Jewish people. In fact, if anyone had a problem, that's going to be against his, against his religion, Islamic religion. Yeah. So.
However, on the most part, and a lot of Palestinians don't realize this, but a lot of Jews connect Zionism to Judaism, and for them, they feel it's the expression of identity. So in their psyche, when they hear a Palestinian being like, "Oh, it's not," there's a difference between Zionism and Judaism, that person is going to be offended because Zionism to them has become the Jewish identity. You know what I mean?
Not just, but it's become important. Yeah. But it's still, Judaism is still separate. Like, I see what you mean. It's become more of into the collective. Yeah.
What I'm saying is that when, like, for the most part, a lot of people that identify as a Zionist with no, you know what I mean, that with nothing relating to the depopulation of Palestinians. You know what I mean? Like, it's got nothing to do with Palestinians. You know what I mean? In their head. But every time a Palestinian hears Zionism, it is intrinsically connected to the demographic change that had to happen in order for Jews to have a country. You know what I mean? So it's very, very hard to desensitize Palestinians to the term Zionism, and it's very, very hard for Zionists to deassociate that term from their Judaism, because it's one and the same for them. And it's just like being in the background and seeing the misunderstandings that are happening from the sideline. It's like, yo, what he's saying has got nothing to do with your depopulation. You know what I mean? It's got nothing to that. And then what he's saying, he's only and then you tell the Zionists that, the Palestinians only acting that way because him Zionism means this. So, and like you see the misunderstanding from both sides, but you can only see that if you have a critical, you're capable of critical thought. You know what I mean? And you can empathize with how people define themselves and whatever. And that's why it's important to learn about each other's narratives.
100%, Jason. I think, I wish we had more time. Jason, it was really absolute pleasure. I think
it's already been an hour.
We would love to have you again.
We've still got lots to talk about, Jason. Unfortunately, as well, I've got to shoot off to work, so we're gonna have to cut it a little bit short.
We do. But before, would I have to say one thing?
Yeah,
Amir.
Oh no! I thought you were gonna, introduce.
I'm just gonna go with the outro. So.
Oh right. You haven't mentioned the tahini this episode?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, here at Open Peace, we do support healthy lives. That means eating a lot of tahini. That does prove to be healthy, particularly Har Bracha tahini. Yes, we're advertising it again. We do wish you here you had an amazing day. Please do not forget to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, hit that also notification bell, and do support us on Patreon to help us on this beautiful journey. And Jason, thank you so much again for coming
Thank
around.
you so much for having me, guys. I really,
Thanks.
really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much, Jason. Come back anytime. Anytime.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.